Okay, crash course on ignition core. If you have ever tried this, you'll realize it sucks. But if you do it on Vanessa and you play a bunch of weapons instead, you'll realize it's actually pretty good, especially for the early and middle days. Why is that? Because burn takes time. It is a DOT, it takes twice per second, and so in order to get that value, it takes you a time, whereas with weapons, it's just flat out immediate. Secondly, you don't need this many burns, right? Because if you look at how the core works, it charges whenever you use an item to the left of it, meaning that if you have it proc twice as fast on half as many items, it will be effectively the same thing. In reality, you can make this proc really fast. It is also one of the few items that can actually scale burn generically. So if we take a look over here, I searched up burn for the fight, which is generally how we word that. So we have charcoal, which only buffs itself, the core, omega ray, and thermal lance, which again only buffs itself. So there's only two sources of generic burn enhancement. Going back to our Bazaar. So that means that this scaling is really valuable. If you also look at the numbers, this does 4 burn per proc. I know that some of these aren't like super high level yet, but they only increase by like, I don't know, like 3, 6, something like that, right? But if you look at it, a couple procs of this already outscales whatever the base value is. So in reality, you kind of just don't care about the base value. You care a lot more about the scaling. So what you basically want to do is have really efficient items for scaling, and then you just buff those items and use the rest of your slots for control and stuff to keep you alive, right? So one of the best concepts that work with this is slow, which is why I have a couple slow items here, right? Because if you think about it, burn takes twice a second, which means if they're all slowed, then they're effectively moving at half the rate, so it's kind of like you burn twice as fast. Not exactly, but in terms of like the DPS arms race, right? It's effectively twice as fast. Also, by the way, that's why Plasma Grenade is really good, but also, we have Pylon, which turns all of your slow into haste, and one thing you might not have known is that each item that gets slowed when you have an AoE slow effect, like Plasma Grenade, will proc separately for Pylon's passive haste effect, meaning if you slow 5 items with Plasma Grenade, Pylon will haste 5 items. Why is that important? Well, we care about proccing the core a bunch, so hasting is pretty good. It also helps us just rack up burn a lot more easily. The way I like to think about slow and haste is just, if all your enemies' items are slowed, and all your items are hasted, you're moving like 4 times as fast. This is especially important because of the thing I pointed out earlier with slow and how it interacts with how burn dot works. But yeah, with that in mind, let's figure out some like actual items. So we want something that is efficient. So we think, okay, well, welding helmet's 3 seconds, that must be pretty good. Well, it's actually kind of not, right? Because it takes 2 slots. So if you think about it, welding helmet is effectively the same thing as 2 small burn items that are 6 seconds each, right? I don't think I actually have those because those don't really exist, but you get the point, right? So we want efficient items. So what are some of the most efficient items in the game? I would say rocket launcher is a pretty good rate. It's naturally 6 seconds, multicast 3, so let me pull up Desmos here. So it's 6 seconds for 3 casts, meaning it effectively is kind of like a 2-second cooldown item, but because it takes up 2 slots, we also multiply this cooldown, like effective cooldown. So it's kind of like you had 2 items at 4 seconds, which is a pretty good rate. If we take a look back at some of these items, right? So like Bomb Squad is going to be 7 seconds, Charcoal's 8, it's a little unfair, but we got Thrusters is 6. Another thing that to look out for is charge items, so Micro Dave in particular is pretty good. It has a specific synergy with Soldering Gun, which is kind of like a mini rocket launcher, but it has a very specific condition that has to be met. Uh, you can literally just do this with Crisp, by the way. It does both effects. So if it's the same item, it will proc both effects. Meaning that this is kind of like a rocket launcher, but on a 5-second cooldown. There's a little bit of like nuance to it. For example, I have this, which hastes a weapon. This is not a weapon, so there's some differences here, but generally, soldering gun is very similar to rocket launcher in that respect. So we're gonna use stuff like rocket launcher, soldering gun, and microdave. I think generally you want to drop microdave, but he's a very good mid game option. So let's kind of build like what a board would look like. So if we were to use microdave, I'll do something like this, and generally we want to focus on like just a couple. So something like this. This is kind of like a cool setup that I like to do where we actually kind of split the soldering gun requirement between duct tape and microdave. So we have like both armor game covered, and honestly duct tape being a 6-second cooldown, whether it's on the left or right, doesn't matter too much. We care much more about the shield. So this thing lets us shield a bunch while also proccing microdave because it is a small item, so it will charge it 3 times whenever it goes off. Right, so this is a decent setup. Ideally, maybe we play some small items here, but currently we don't have a source of haste, so maybe we just do this. This is also why I drop microdave half the time, so like realistically I would do like this. This is much better. This now means core LEDs, by the way, whenever you use the core slow, and it itself is a slow item, which is good for pylon for the reasons we talked before, 4 times faster. So this is just effectively the same setup as before, except this time we have more slow and a persistent source of slow other than pylon, meaning we can keep like effectively like 3 things perma-slowed, maybe 4 depending on how fast the core is. And then we kind of just have an Aiden. This can technically just be any one slot friend, but Aiden is the best because you do haste a bunch. And then this will usually carry you pretty hard into the mid game. One thing to note is that pylon generally should not be played until a haste 2, because that's when you start getting into perma haste territory. You can just do this at like Curios, or you upgrade it. Curios Junkyard has a thing that when you sell it, it buffs things haste, which is pretty good. And also, honestly, I would play Plasma Grenade for just 1 ammo. Maybe not silver tier, but the effect of effectively perma hasting your entire board, right? Because this starts the bunch of haste chain that pylon gives, so if effectively just end up being perma hasted with just after the first shot. Pretty good. Do note that again, this can kind of just be whatever if you end up getting a good haste source. Like when you use the core haste, it's really good, but you do want to use the concepts of slow and haste a lot in burn, and you want to really just lean more so on the defensive side. So for example, if we had core haste, I would replace this with anything that can disrupt the opponent, so like freeze, cooldown increase like from atomic clock. Currently chrono barrier is bugged, that's like a random aside, so don't use chrono barrier. And so freeze, slow, shield I would kind of prioritize a little bit less. Generally duct tape is enough shield with this setup, but if you don't have duct tape, you can do like just any sort of good shield item. I like Aegis, although that's more of a pylon item. Anyways, that's the aside. So freeze, armor gain, slow, and potential item destruction. That tends to be a bit harder to fit, but if you can somehow fit it in, that is actually quite strong too. Another thing you can do, which is a little bit harder to hit, I would say this is a good like just consistent build to go for, is if you get Omega Ray, which is the item I talked about earlier. Oh, by the way, if you don't do the math for soldering gun, it's just this. And if you ever wanted to figure out approximately how much burn damage you would do, for example, the ignition core does 4 burn at level 1. You would just do 4 plus 1 divided by 2. So this gets you the average damage of effectively 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1. And then you just multiply it by how many instances there are. Just random average formula if you ever want to figure out like early game burn. This does not matter late game burn because you're never going to tick it down to 1 But it's just something if you ever want to do the math on. This also means that ignition core does effectively 10 damage. And by the way, just to show you that stacking burn does more damage, so if we do this, so say we like did 2 stacks of burn separately, that comes out to 20 damage. But if we did it 8, right, so this is still the same number of instances, it's just that we have stacked up, let's say we did 8 burn at once, right? Compared to 2 separate instances of 4, you'll notice this does more damage. It's just math, glossing over it, just know that stacking burn is good, right? So the other possible burn build that I like to try is if you get Omega Ray, because the scaling is actually quite good, especially at Diamond. It ends up being about the same. Ignition Core, by the way, has a special level up upgrade that can effectively make this increase by 1. I would say always take it just because it's kind of like you level past Diamond, but just know that Omega Ray scales really well. And that it counts all other rays, so you can kind of stack a bunch of rays. And you can honestly just do, let me go back to the Bazaar. You can honestly just do, instead of like these items, you just put a bunch of rays, and then these are your control slots. That's also a viable build. Another thing is that there's a lot of monster items that really work well with burn. So for example, oh god, what's it called? I think it's called like Infernal Greatsword. If you ever get this up, it's pretty cool. You're gonna need like a battery or something, but it's quite strong, honestly. This item specifically can just replace your core because it stacks itself, and you just try to get the proc a bunch. Random aside, but know that monster items are actually very powerful for burn, and you don't just insta-sell them for like 50 gold. At least some of the time. Another thing is that burn is generally a tempo build, because other items, they will get like damage scaling skills and whatnot, and they'll just like naturally gain damage. When they upgrade, they get more damage. Burn, again, as I said, the base values don't really do too much. It's like a little bit nice, but you really just care about your scaling. And your scaling kind of just hits a wall once you hit Diamond Ignition Core. You know, again, the only other thing that would scale is Omega Ray. But you generally want to win pretty early. Like, I don't know, that's pretty much it, honestly. Yeah, this was kind of not really a structured, like, formal guide, but I figured just a rant would be pretty good for people, because I feel like people don't understand the ideas behind burn, and they just kind of go gung-ho and just put a bunch of burn items, and then they die, because they have no defenses and no disruption. If you like the video, like, subscribe, YouTube stuff, I don't know. Just tell me if you want to see more in the comments, honestly.